sardines, right? Like all day. Like, what's going on? And so he said, well, I'm doing ketogenic dieting. This was pre, obviously, Keto OS. So, but anyway, and I was like, well, Dom's like, how many times do you eat a day? He's eating like once or twice a day, twice my size. I'm like, well, maybe I should look into this. So again, then obviously one of the things Jeff Bullock was doing a ton of research on this, just a pioneer in the field, crushing it, and he did a ton of research on metabolism, blood lipids, and then one of our passions, he came and spoke at National Strength and Conditioning Association on the role of ketogenic dieting in endurance athletes. It was fascinating. But he's sitting there, Dom and Bullock are doing all this work, and someone asked, what's the work on resistance training? And he said, well, you need a lot more work in that area. So Ryan and I said, well, we really need to dedicate our time on this area. So, another thing that fascinated us is that Dom never ages. So, and there's actually some cool stuff right now about ketogenic dieting. Bullock doesn't either. Like, he looks the same as I saw him like several years ago. So I was like, well, there's actually some research on some lifelong models coming out now on ketogenic dieting. We're doing lifelong models now, like rat models, where ketogenic dieting plus supplemental ketones and things of that nature. So, and everything that interests me is just the diet itself is just really cool. When you look and you put people on a diet, oftentimes they just don't respond. Some of the testimonials here yesterday were, man, I tried every single diet and it didn't work. I think it was an Andy yesterday. Talked about his testimonial. Well, this is a study here where they took people who were insulin resistant, meaning that, not very sensitive to the effects of insulin, and people who were insulin sensitive. And they put them on a low-fat diet over here, and basically, if you look over here on the low-fat diet, the insulin-sensitive people who are pretty much probably lean all the time anyway, lost weight, lost fat on a low-fat diet. People who are insulin resistant, most of the people who were trying to lose weight in the first place didn't respond. Okay? But if you look over to your right, when you put them on the low-carb ketogenic diet, both the insulin resistant and insulin sensitive responded. So the responder rate was higher. And this is cool to us, right? More people are responding to this diet. This is some research that we came out with that we just published in Journal of Applied Physiology. And basically, this is a rat study. And what I want you to see here is basically that, see my pointer works here. If you look over at the calorie consumption, okay, you had basically a normal Western diet, which is like, these rats could eat whatever they wanted. So there's a Western diet, there's a ketogenic diet, and there's like a high protein, low fat diet, okay? So if you look over to your right, the group that had the higher protein, lower fat diet, the calories consumed was the lowest. So that's called that's the black group. The top two groups, they could eat whatever they want. You have the ketogenic group and the Western diet. Okay, they could eat whatever they want too. So the ketogenic group and the Western diet had eaten the same amount of calories, right? And if you look at the basically over here, fat mass was the middle group's the keto group. The group over to your right is the group that had the lowest amount of calories, but they had the higher protein intake. And then the group to your left is the group that was the Western, like higher carb diet. My point is that the keto group ate more calories, right, than the group that was on the low-fat diet and lost more fat. That's cool. That's interesting, right? So this is the picture of the rats here. The middle group's the keto group, right? So the middle group's the keto group. It literally looks like there's no fat on them at all. And when we saw that, to us, that was mind-blowing, right? It's like, wow. It looked like an anatomy chart. And they're eating 75% fat. So that to us is fascinating. This is some recent data that we have, okay? And it's looking at food efficiency. So it's like how much weight you gain per gram of food they ate, the exercise carb group alone. When you added ketones, that's how much weight they ate per gram, how much weight they gained per gram of food they ate. And if you look at the KD group, which is a ketogenic group, the exercise plus keto gained less weight per gram of food they ate. And then when you added exogenous ketones, they gained less weight per gram of food they ate. Does it make sense? So this is really cool. That's interesting stuff. So it says, well, maybe there's something about ketones kind of indicating this in this rat study. Right? Oh, and also, this was a salt. These were salts, so these were the ketone salts. And we found their brown adipose tissue was higher. So I'll talk about brown adipose tissue later in this talk, but it's thermically active, meaning it's like it's like a metabolically active tissue that you want. So how did I meet Brian and Michael and Dustin? Well, actually, obviously I've known Dom for a while, and I went to see Angela Poff's dissertation. Ryan and I saw it, and I'll be honest with you, like she'll talk about this with cancer. I won't go into this, but we were literally floored. I mean, we watched her dissertation and said the world's going to change, like the world's not going to be the same ever again. And it was that mind-blowing. And so after that, I got a chance to become good friends with Angela. We're going to go Lightning game next week. And so basically, she introduced us to Brian Underwood. And our first conversation, like he's just up front. He's like, we want to use the latest science has to offer. He's like, we don't want it if it doesn't work. But the biggest thing he said, we want to help people reach their dreams. And that was the cool thing I saw when I came to Vegas, is that, like, so much passion. And I was like, man, this is awesome. So, now, here's the thing, though. Today's society, a lot of it's social media driven. I mean, I love social media. But you see this and like, well, The Rock is eating high carbs, right? So, he's jacked. But of course, LeBron's eating low carb, so I should go keto. Now, these are interesting, and I've said that too. But this is interesting stuff. But the bottom line is like, it's not like science. You know what I mean? It's not science. So the question is like, what does science say? Ryan and I were out in San Francisco. Was it last week? So that's a cool statue of the thinker. What does science have to say? Well, I'll tell you what, when you read most papers, ketogenic diet is a high-fat diet, yes? So when you look here, it's like, look at this, like, high-fat diet disrupts behavioral and molecular circadian rhythms. Basically, chronic high-fat diet in fathers programs beta cell dysfunction. You look at this, high-fat diets cause obesity and other serious health hazards. Tons of papers on high-fat diets being horrible. Well, in reality, you need to change the high-fat to high-fat, high-carbohydrate, right? So you can't mix, that's not ketogenic. And I think that's important to understand. There's a total difference. And Ryan will talk about this in his talk later today. So what is a ketogenic diet? And I know you guys know this. I'm just going to just slight review about it. The main thing about a ketogenic diet is it looks like this. Like 75% or 70% or more of your diet is fat. Maybe up to 85 or 90%. But a good diet that like we use when we do training studies, athletic studies, we generally use like something like 70-75% of the diet is fat, 20 to 25% of the diet is protein. So it's moderate in protein. It's not like the traditional Atkins diet where it's, I'm going to eat a bunch of protein. And most of the times if we work with like athletes, like bodybuilders, and they say, I've done a ketogenic diet. Like, okay, what did you eat? Well, I ate, chicken breasts and broccoli, but no carbs. So pretty much what they were eating before, but they removed the oatmeal, right? That's not keto. Keto's more like, very high fat, bacon, burgers, things of that nature. Okay? So the other thing to understand, so when you're in ketosis, you're in a metabolic state where your liver produces these things called ketones, ketone bodies. And we see the one that you're most familiar with is BHB. Okay? So and that's very, very important. That's a lot of what we'll talk about in this talk. Right? So what's an easier explanation if someone's asking you what are ketones? This is sort of like the Keto Academy. You think about, you have 3 macronutrients. You have carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, right? Okay? So what happens if you, like you guys, right? If you put cream inside of like water or something like that, what's it do? Rise to the top. So fats generally, like water, insoluble. But ketones, on the other hand, like when you mix your ketones, are water soluble, right? So you kind of think of them as like a water soluble fat in a sense. And that's kind of a way to kind of think about like ketones. That's easy to understand. Maybe as a fat 4th macronutrient. So keto adaptation is what is it? That's Tony over there. Okay, here's the thing to understand. The other thing is just kind of talking about myths. When most people have done keto, generally they stop within 1 or 2 weeks. So you'll ask them, they go, well, I've tried ketogenic diet and it didn't work. Well, how long do you do it? Well, I tried it for 5 days. Right? So if you look here, this is a study looking at basically they ate 100 grams of carbs. After they trained really hard. They depleted all their carbohydrate stores, and then they had 2 days of 100 grams of carbs, which is not really a ketogenic diet, but 2 days of 100 grams of carbs. And if you look at their performance, so look at normal carbohydrate. You have the normal carbohydrate here. And you have the low carbohydrate. So normal carbohydrate's the gray, the low carbohydrate's the green. This is how many reps they could get per set of lifting weights. Notice their reps went down. So people will point to these studies and go, well, low carbohydrate, you can't perform very well on that. The problem is that this is 2 days. They haven't adapted. Okay? So what does it mean to be adapted? It takes several weeks to actually adapt. And I think that's very, very important to understand. So like at first you're like, I can't think straight. But then, afterwards, you're kind of ready to train again. So let's see what this looks like. So this is a study that we did, right? You're looking at blood ketone levels. The first 2 weeks, remember, you're not able to train. So these are weeks we're keto adapting these athletes over the hump. Right there, exogenous ketones can help ameliorate or blunt like those symptoms that you normally get. Okay, so so this is a study by Finney. This is a classic study. This is one of the first studies that you kind of see looking at time to exhaustion. And so Finney basically took people who were overweight and looked at their time to exhaustion. So time to exhaustion is, say you go on a treadmill. The longer you go, the better before you quit. 1 week after ketogenic diet, their time to exhaustion went down, and then notice after 6 weeks it actually improved. So they were keto adapted. In our laboratory, we've done a ton of research with keto adaptation and resistance training, and we found that basically when you adapt, you're able to make all of those adaptations. Jeff, Dr. Volek, has done a ton on keto adaptation, which I'm sure he'll get into in his talk. Some amazing adaptations occur. Okay, but isn't keto too restrictive? Like, that's one of the things that we talk about, it's too, I can't eat anything. Those are the things that you hear, right? Well, is it? So, like, this is, so one of the things, like, I like doing, one of my hobbies is making keto recipes. So it's hard to see on the screen, but that's like, that's keto candy on the bottom, and then keto hot chocolate. My cat's in the background. This is Ryan Lowry. He makes keto pancakes every single morning, and I know Abigail makes them too. Okay. Keto peanut butter cups.
Oh.
Right. Bacon, steak, bacon eggs, keto cookies. My mom makes really good keto cookies. And actually, I just visited home, and my mom made me this keto pizza here. So, cauliflower crust. The key is you have to drain the cauliflower. You can't just like steam it and cook it. You need to drain it for a few days, and then it's on point. So, anyway, the point is, it's a very, very good diet. It's very fun. It's a lot of fun. So, okay, the other thing is that people are like, well, you can't adhere to this. You can't maintain weight loss. This is what happens with normal low-fat dieting. So you look here, 19 weeks they low-fat dieted these subjects, and look, they lost a lot of weight. Then they came back and said, okay, do your thing, keep following these low-fat diet guidelines. We'll see you in several weeks. At 71 weeks, they gained back most of their weight. At 175 weeks, they gained back all their weight. That's what we see with low-fat dieting. If you look here, they dieted these people down on ketogenic dieting for 6 months. They lost weight, and they said, continue to follow the diet. They followed up with them like 38 weeks later, and if you look, they had maintained the majority of their weight loss. So you can sustain yourself on a diet like this. Right? So, all right, so one of the questions that we want to answer is there a metabolic advantage, with ketogenic diet? And by the way, this is a very controversial topic, okay? So people fight about this all the time. Scientists fight on social media. Like I never thought I'd see the day, but anyway, so is there a metabolic advantage with ketogenic dieting? Well, first, this is a study that came out, and a lot of people point to this study like over and over and over and over again. And look at the title: ketogenic low carbohydrate diets have no metabolic advantage over non-ketogenic low carbohydrate diets. Interesting. But here's the results. Well, that's the title of the study. You didn't need to read the paper, right? But, I mean, that's it. So I can throw this down and walk on the stage. All right, well, the thing is, we have to take a look at this stuff, right? We got to take a look. So, first off, if you look at their BMI, like they both went down the same. Like, it's true. In this study, I'm going to put quotation marks around it. The keto group went down the same as the low-fat diet, right? And that's why they had that title. But we got to look at ketone levels here, okay? So if you look here at the end of the study, those are blood ketone levels between the two groups. There is no significant difference on blood ketone levels between the groups, right? So there's something, I'm sensing something, right? Right? Non-compliance. And Jeff Bullock, we were talking about this the other week, he knows exactly what I'm talking about. You have to get people to comply. Like, that is one of the biggest things. I can't emphasize it enough. If someone's not, if you just say, oh, do a ketogenic diet, it's an education process. People have to understand this. It's very important. Chris Urban's here. He's in our lab. And Chris has done a ton of research on ketogenic diet. A ton. This guy right here is going to be like up on this stage, killing it. The guy's doing huge research. But anyway, so Chris, when he does ketogenic dieting studies, Chris works with these guys every single day, calls them, talks to them. They're in the lab every day. It's a process, right? And so that's important. So let's go to study 2 here. This is a study by Bullock, and basically instructed people to follow ketogenic or low-fat diet, restrict calories. If you look at actually calorie logs, the ketogenic diet group actually ate more calories than the Western diet group, the higher carb group, right? But if you look here, the ketogenic dieting group lost more body fat. The green is the low fat. The ketogenic dieting group is the gray. Okay, they lost more total fat mass, and both total fat mass and trunk fat mass. Okay, so even though they had more calories, so interesting stuff. What about like kids? Brian was talking to me about and introducing like some products and stuff for kids, which is really interesting, right? Because in our society, obesity is going up really high in children. It's very sad. And of course, it's hard to control. Like if I'm a kid and you give me a big gulp, I'm not going to think about my abs. You know what I mean? So it's important to like think about different interventions that can help with kids. So here they have like more of a ketogenic type diet. So it was a low carb diet, and they tracked their calories to be 1,800 calories a day. The kids on the keto type low carb diet, the low fat group was eating 1,100 calories a day. The low carb group lost more fat. So it's like, well, it seems to be this metabolic type of advantage to ketogenic dieting, right? So this is fascinating to us. And this is looking at the amount of weight lost. You see the low-fat group on your left. Those are individual subjects. And then you see the low-carb group to your right, the individual subjects. Much more robust response, even though they're eating more calories. So this is important. Now, if you remember, too, at the beginning of the presentation, I showed you our rat study, where even, because people will go, well, it's just protein intake. But if you look at our rat study, even though the calories were lower on the low-fat group, the protein was the exact same in the low-fat group as it was in the keto group that we had, who were eating more calories. So it's not, there's something beyond that that's occurring. So what role can ketones have in body composition and performance? This is a very new area. So different possibilities that we think that we want to look into. Possibly it protects against muscle loss. Possibly it improves insulin sensitivity. And I will cover each of these topics. Possibly improves cognitive function, metabolically active brown tissue, possibly decrease inflammation. So these are things that we'll talk about. So let's talk about sparing lean mass. This is a classic study by Young, okay? And what they did was they did a study. They gave people 100 grams of carbs, 60 grams of carbs, and 30 grams of carbs. We would all say that's all low carb, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look here, was it basically, so again, that's here. They started off at 400 grams of carbs, and again, they went to either 160 or 30 grams of carbs. Now, if you look here, fat loss in a dose-dependent fashion from 100 grams of carbs, which is all the way to your left, 60 grams of carbs in the middle, 30 grams of carbs all the way to your right. Fat was lost in a dose-dependent fashion, right? And so the lower the carb that you were, even though calories and protein were the exact same, the more fat you lost. Okay? And if you look here at like ketone levels, kind of just to put it in perspective that you guys might look at, the highest amount of ketones was in the 30-gram carb group. Right? The lowest amount was in the 100-gram carb group. And why is that important? Because you saw fat loss was greatest, right, in the lowest carb group. But what happened to muscle? I think that's a very important tissue that we have to be very aware of when we're dieting. Because people just look at the scale, and it's not just the scale. You have to look at body composition in general. Look at this. Lean mass lost. The 30-gram carb group lost almost none. They had the highest level of ketones. The 104-gram group lost the most. They had the lowest amount. They weren't even really in ketosis at all. So the question is, are ketones having a sparing effect of certain amino acids that are important for muscle? That's a question. Well, we did a unique model to test this out in our lab, okay? So who's heard of like cyclic ketogenic dieting? Okay, so what we did was cyclic is basically on the weekdays you go keto, and on the weekends you carb up. And if you look at the original books on this, they have people like really carving up a lot on the weekends. Okay, and so, but anyway, we basically switched them from on the weekdays they ate keto, on the weekends they carved up. Okay, now look at this. Look at the blood ketone levels. That's over to your left. Okay. The squares are the cyclic ketogenic dieting group. They carved up on the weekends. So Monday, would they be in ketosis?
No.
No. And you see the squares? They're not in ketosis. They don't actually get into ketosis until like Thursday, Friday. The group that was in keto every day, what happened? They're in ketosis the whole time. Now, but here's the thing. They both lost the same amount of mass. You see, the cyclic group and the keto group lost the same amount of mass. But does it scale everything? No. So look at this. Okay, fat mass was lost greatest in the ketogenic group compared to the cyclic group. That means if they lost the same amount of mass, what was the cyclic group losing? Muscle. Okay, so that's intriguing to us. Strength, the ketogenic dieting group, who was keto adapted, went up in strength. That's the group that went up. The cyclic group was going down. Okay? And the same thing happened to strength endurance, like how many reps they could just crank out. This keto group went up, the cyclic group went down. Now this is some interesting data that we have where we took rats, they were keto adapted, okay, and we gave them like, who's heard of branched chain amino acids? Okay, those are the amino acids that like trigger muscle growth, okay, protein synthesis. So all the way to your left, okay, is a carb diet. We gave them basically branched chain amino acids. These are amino acids or in protein that kind of stimulate muscle growth. So they went up in the blood when you gave those. But see that blue line? Okay? All the way to your right is the keto diet. Notice the amino acid levels went up higher when you were keto adapted and your ketone levels were high. One of the things about ketones is that they spare the breakdown of those branched chain amino acids. They don't let them get broken down as much. But amino acids that are really good for being converted to like glucose for the muscle, those actually are allowed to kind of get turned into glucose. So, but the amino acids that are good for like muscle seem to get spared. Okay. So real briefly, kind of going through this also, this study showed that administration of BHB improved insulin sensitivity by 40%, right? So insulin resistance is huge in our society. It impairs fat metabolism and things of that nature. When you're insulin resistant, your pancreas has to work harder. It's got to pump out more insulin, which is not good for body fat in general. Also, we see here, this is looking at paragraph recall scores, which is an indicator of cognitive performance. And if you look at serum ketone BHB levels, which is what you're always looking at when you prick yourself, there's a relationship between paragraph recall scores and serum BHB levels. So it may have important cognitive effects, like focus. And so this is a study we did with the exogenous ketones, salts. And basically what we did was we looked at focus. Let's see right here. So when you gave them on, so you elevate blood ketone levels. But if you look at focus is in the ketone levels. Focus goes up when you take the ketones compared to not taking them. So you guys, when you end up taking ketones, how do you feel? A little bit more zoned in? Yeah, right? Awesome. So that's the point. So basically it enhances focus. And of course, like if you're dieting, you stop not being able to think as well. So that's very, very important. Another thing is, here, they're looking at cardiac output, like the hydraulic work of the heart itself. So if you look at the green group, okay, that's when you get glucose plus ketones. And if you look at the hydraulic work of the heart, it's improved. It's going up. Okay? And if you look here, this is actually research from Peter Attia, and you're looking at O2 utilization. So the higher that this basically is, the more energy you're having to expend to do any given amount of work. If you're, anyone run? Anyone do like endurance? Okay? Well, if you're doing endurance, you don't want to be expending a bunch of energy to get a certain amount of work done. Okay? You want to be efficient. So basically what Peter Attia showed, the red is when he took ketones. Notice that he's having to use less oxygen to do the same amount of work. That means you're more efficient. Okay, and I think that's very, very important. In fact, BHB generates more ATP per 2 carbon molecule basically than glucose. So it's a more efficient fuel. In fact, if you look at a quote here, recent studies have shown that BHB, the principal ketone, is not just a fuel, it's a super fuel. So, yeah. So anyway, so that's the point. It's pretty cool. I mean, it's interesting stuff. Anti-inflammatory, there's a lot of papers coming out showing that it's actually anti-inflammatory. And if you are doing if you're doing like exercise as part of your body composition change regimen, then that's going to be really important. That you're able to decrease inflammation. Okay. Now this is something I talked to you about earlier. Okay, we found it with the ketone salts. This is another study. What you're seeing is that, like, administration of ketones, all the way to your left, they're looking at markers of mitochondrial biogenesis. You guys know what mitochondria is? Yeah. That's where we metabolize fat. Okay? So if you see what they're showing basically is that exogenous ketones are actually increasing mitochondria. In the middle is brown fat. Okay, so you can see the group to the right in the middle is the exogenous ketone group. Brown fat is basically a thermically active tissue, so it metabolizes calories, metabolize a lot of calories. It makes you less efficient at storing fat, overall fat. So it's a very thermically active tissue. In fact, if you do studies with like animal models, animals that have a high amount of brown adipose tissue are what we call obesity resistant. It's hard for them to become obese. So exogenous ketones increases the formation of brown adipose. So these are all really cool things. Okay, so but the point is that because there's not a ton of we need a lot more researchers going after this. We need a lot more people like you guys out here kind of like getting into this and spreading the word. This is a really, really cool topic. So, guys, brace yourself. And thank you. That's the end. And appreciate it.
So please, when you ask the question, wipe your hand, stand up, say your name, and
all right. Lynn, yeah, sure. What, Lynn?
Nope.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Dr. Wilson, thank you once again for the great presentation. I've been following you since 2010 when you first started getting into ketosis. So with ketosis or keto adapting, if we do exercises like high intensity training, will that speed up the process? When you kind of, decrease the glycogen storage faster?
Great question, man. I'm glad you asked that. So Chris is in this. Chris, stand up, Chris. This guy's awesome. Ryan back here too. Hey, give Chris a hand. God, I love you guys. This is awesome. So anyway, so Chris and Ryan and the guys in our lab, a lot of guys in our lab, that was the question that they had, Lynn, and they spent a ton of time on this last semester and actually found that when you go through this, when you actually deplete glycogen faster, that you actually seems to speed the keto adaptation process. So a lot of people are like, well, should I go really like light when I'm starting to get in ketosis because I don't feel as good the first 2 weeks? Just go all in. You know, especially if you're like, I'm saying especially for athletes. Get it over with is the thought. At least that's what their data indicated. So yeah, I think basically interval training, when you do things like sprinting, I want to say basically a 30-second all-out sprint, and I'll see you work, this is all relative. For you, that might be a 30-second brisk walk, right? For someone else, it might be, for you, it might be, you know, sprinting all the way up a hill. It depends on who you are and where your starting point is. Do you know what I mean? So again, some of you guys might be sprint all the way up a hill. Some of you guys might be a brisk walk, and that's fine. It's all relative to you. But when you do that, you deplete a lot of glycogen, and it gets you into ketosis faster. Whoever, yeah, anybody.
Hello again. My name is Michael. Thank you very much for your presentation. A couple other questions just on the research that you pointed out. The first one was Peter Attila's study. Was that his individual study, or was that a new thing that he's done that's controlled?
So that was Peter's individual research. We need guys like Volek, you know, to really do a lot with it, with the like a huge, larger group. This is his own individual data.
And then the other research where you showed a decline in lean mass, was that controlled for protein amount? And if you have those amounts, so we can show if you are retaining lean mass on a ketogenic diet, is it controlled for protein amount?
Great question. Yeah, the answer is Peter Tia, yes, with his own data. Our research with the cyclic ketogenic dieting, we control for protein. The Young 1971 study, protein was the same. Because they gave them their meals. The only difference was that small proportion of carbohydrate difference. Great question. Oh, and by the way, he's training Superman. So you're going out to London tomorrow. So that's going to be pretty cool stuff. Any other questions?
Yes, my name is Greg. I'm from Tampa here. I've got a granddaughter that's type 1 diabetic. Can you elaborate a little bit on how it's going to affect the pancreas and the insulin levels?
Okay, so these guys are probably better experts at this. I don't know that ketones are going to directly like regenerate the pancreas, but of course that would be, I don't know, you know. Yeah, don't go talk about that. When you come up next? Yeah. We had a question up here. Ketones do make you more insulin sensitive, though. That way is what I can tell you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. This is Will Fontan from Fredericksburg, Virginia. Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Wilson. My question is very selfish and very particular as far as exogenous ketones and the timing, if any, in your studies. Does the timing when we take it throughout the day, hours before a workout, any of your studies show any benefits, or is that like a non-factor taken into your research? Thank you.
Great question. So relative to training, like one thing we do know is that like we've seen within 30 minutes, you get like increased focus and things of that nature. So given the fact that when most people train, they're not like, I'm going to time this at like an hour and a half. The fact that it's rapidly acting basically to me indicates that like if you took it 30 minutes before your workouts, that would be very beneficial. And then possibly if you're resistance training, and then possibly if you're cycling, you would probably like have it in your bottle and be drinking it. You know, just like other cyclists might be drinking a carbohydrate, you'd be drinking the ketones during the session itself. Yeah.
Good morning, my name is Chris. I have a gynecology practice and everybody's a woman. So I'm wondering, have you done any studies, I know you're doing the athletes, on women, and especially women of a certain age that are in menopause, are you seeing any difference in their ability to burn fat?
Great question, Chris. Dr. Volk's like the world's foremost expert on that. In fact, he's done a ton of research. Yeah, so he's done a ton of research on women who are postmenopausal, women who are overweight, middle age and elderly and stuff like that. And he has found a metabolic advantage, improved blood lipid profile, and lots of fat loss, improved insulin sensitivity. So, and the cool thing is actually, that's the thing, is the stuff with the athletes that we're doing now is really new stuff, but the ketogenic dieting with fat loss and improved blood lipid profile, like that's probably got the most research behind it.
Two more. I'll just answer his question. As a cyclist, I use this product all the time. My name's Chris. I'm from New York. Chris from New York. You're fine. But as a cyclist, I use it all the time. To answer your question, how I do it, 30 minutes before I drink an uncaffeinated one, and then I have another bottle filled. If I do a 6-hour bike ride, it's just filled with the Ketones, and I just sit there for the ride. So, any endurance athlete, that's what I want to use it.
One more question.
My name's John Gordon from Naples, Florida, and I'm a 63-year-old distance runner still. And my question is, how important are minerals and supplementation? Because with the ketogenic diet, you lose some of your nutrition.
Very important. I think one of the biggest things that Finney did in his studies is supplementation of like those minerals, right? So I think that's crucial. Like for example, think about like salt, for example. When you're keto, you sort of excrete salt at a higher rate. So people who are super, health conscious, low fat, lightly salting everything, when they go in a ketogenic diet, and they maintain that, well, now you're excreting salt at sort of a higher rate, and you have to make up for that, right? Things like magnesium are very important. A lot, so I think a good mineral cocktail is important as part of, again, a very well formulated ketogenic diet. Because when people think ketogenic diet, they think just cut out the carbs and eat bacon, and bacon's awesome. But in the same token, there's a lot more to it than that, and that's certainly part of it. Great question. All right. Okay, guys, thank you so much.